Come, spellweavers, reavers, rogues, and men-at-arms, and answer the call of adventure. Pick up your sword, your axe, your spellbook, your bow, your rulebook, and your dice, and join the forces of good in their eternal fight against vile monsters, conspiring min-maxers, horny bards, and blood-soaked murder hobos. Discover the treasure trove of role-playing games here on Rollin' Bones. My name is Ryan Howard, and I shall be your guide. Good evening, Boneheads, and welcome to Rollin' Bones with Ryan Howard, where we make old school young again. I am your host and king of the Boneheads, Ryan Howard, and joining me this evening is someone who a lot of you know, maybe a lot of you haven't seen. I certainly had not seen his face until just before we went on. He had always just been a presence in my chat and kind of around the communities that I like to run in. But you all know him and love him. You respect him greatly. You've seen him in your chat. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Krafty Matt Kraft.
Yeah, hey, what's going on, you guys?
It is going great.
Boneheads.
Absolutely.
I have been called that drunk guy that shows up at the industry dinner and just never goes home and nobody notices.
That's a claim to fame.
Yeah, no, it is. It is. So I'm a mod right now on, with the Legion of Myth. I also do an actual play with a channel called James Corp. We're playing Savage Pathfinder. So it happens every Monday in the afternoon because they're a bunch of UK guys. Mm-hmm. But yeah. But other than that, I don't have a podcast. I don't have a broadcast. I don't do a blog. I'm just that guy.
But one thing you do have is a vast knowledge of 5th edition D&D. You are perhaps most famous for telling people to read the Dungeon Master's Guide. And so tonight we are basically dedicating the show to yours and my defense of 5th edition D&D from a community that largely either is indifferent to 5e or outright hates it.
And doesn't have to be that way.
Right.
5e is not that bad of a game. Community might be, but not the game itself.
Absolutely. But before we jump into that, of course, because it's your first time on Rollin' Bones, we have tradition to observe here. So, starting at the very beginning of your gaming career, how did you get into this little hobby of ours?
3rd grade. I went to a school in Mission Viejo, California. I live in California. I've lived in California all my life. My father was a Marine who basically got stationed out here and just stayed. And in 3rd grade, in the cafeteria, I noticed that some older kids, maybe 5th, 6th, 7th grade, were playing a game with dice and talking about dragons. And I watched. And then eventually they let me into the game, but not as an actual player. I was either the torchbearer or I was the guy that was hauling around all of their gear. But I didn't care because I was part of the game, which was amazing to me. My real start in Dungeons and Dragons was probably with the red box that I bought for $15 off of my buddy Randy. Mm-hmm. And it had a key in it for making dungeons. And we used to sit, this is about maybe 5th grade, we used to sit in the cafeteria and we used to draw out all sorts of different maps. Mm-hmm. And then we would swap back and forth running each other through these maps. And then in high school is really where I dove very deeply into role-playing, specifically Palladium games, Rifts, all of that kind of stuff. In fact, ran a 4-year Dog Boy campaign. Actually got called to the office one year because either a student or a teacher, librarian or whatnot, right? They thought that we were talking about terrorist things when we were playing our Risk campaign. And so I was very fortunate that one of our history teachers, Mr. Sibby, he was also a gamer. He was a 2E gamer. And because of what happened to us in freshman year, he decided to open up his classroom during lunch and after school for a role-playing club. And he ran a 2E game and let anybody come in and run whatever they want. So from there, I ran Star Wars, I ran Palladium, I had the Aliens Adventure game, which never played that game. It is awful. It is horrible. Leading Edge doesn't know how to design a game, but certainly go for the new Free League game.
Oh yeah.
And that's basically where it was. Then I got out of high school, went into college, started playing more Cyberpunk and also Call of Cthulhu, and then got married to my wife, had kids. My wife was one of the head cheerleaders at her school, so when she came over, it was I gotta like put all of this stuff away.
Yep.
And but then I'm guessing I don't know how many years ago, one of my salesmen, because I'm a salesman by trade, one of my salesmen was talking about running a Pathfinder game, and I went, "Oh yeah, I used to do that." And then he bought me the 5e Player's Handbook, and then he got me Art and Arcana for Christmas, which was all the history of D&D, and then it just kind of exploded from there, much to my wife's chagrin.
Gotcha. Now, of all the games that you've played over the years, I know this is a difficult question for a lot of people. It's like picking between your children. What would you say your favorite game system is, however you would quantify a favorite game?
This is my favorite game. Conan 2D20. This game is tailor-made for my game mastering style, which is kind of over the top. I flail my hands a lot. I can't speak without my hands, so apologize about that. But I get really excited when players get to do cool stuff in 2D20. And the system of momentum and threat, that ebb and flow of awesome stuff that's happening, just delights me to no end. Think of the chase scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark, where Indy's going after the caravan that's carrying the Ark, right? Yeah. And that right there is the epitome of momentum and threat.
Oh yeah.
And how 2D20 works.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is the second show in a row where Raiders has come up as an example of what role-playing should be, so I think that's going to end up kind of sticking with us.
Yeah, I have an entire write-up of it on Legion of Myth's their Gilded server, but then also on Modifius's forums as well.
Gotcha. And obviously Conan plays very well to me, being who I am and having the lineage that I have.
Right. So yeah, I make it a joke that whenever I'm in chat, I force you to bring it up.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I don't hate talking about it. I just don't want all of you out there who watch the show to hate me talking about it.
No, we'll never hate that. I mean, that right. I mean, you are what 2, 3, 4 steps away from sword and sorcery pulp royalty.
Yeah.
So you'll never be crowned king, but it's your claim to fame.
Yeah, absolutely. And whenever there's say a fun fact about yourself thing at work or some kind of social event, I usually break that out, and for the 2 cool people in the room, it's generally a good. It gets a good reaction. Everyone else is just like, "Oh yeah, I remember that Schwarzenegger movie." I'm just like, "Okay,
right."
Yeah." There's
or they go, "Who?"
Yeah. Conan O'Brien.
You're right.
So, when it comes to, and you've already talked a little bit about this from the game master side, kind of your preferred style when it comes to running your games, but when it comes to playing in games, how do you generally like to play when you get the chance to not be pulling the strings behind the screen, as it were?
which is very rare.
Yeah.
The reason that I like being the game master is one, I like to talk, and two, I always like to play, and I hate waiting for my turn. But generally, when I play in first person. I really do try to get into my character's persona, speak as my character, uh, let the game master know what I'm doing in character, and then generally wait for the game master to tell me to roll the dice, which is the way you should do it.
Mm-hmm. You just made Max very happy in chat here.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Waiting for the dungeon master to call on you. Exactly. Now, those of us who put a lot of time into this, we do so not for the money, because there's barely any money in this, but we mostly do it for love. And the reason we love this game is we have very fond memories of playing it with our friends, forming relationships over it. So if you had to pick a fondest RPG memory, what would that be?
Um, Fondest RPG memory. Wow. That would probably be when I discovered that the one of the guys in my freshman English class, he also played role playing games, but specifically he played Robotech. And I hadn't seen Robotech since I was a little kid and watched the show on television. So the fact that he had all of these Robotech books, I mean, it was like we were instant friends. And so from there, Damon and I, we would finish up all of our work in class, and then we would sit in the back, and all we would do is we just make characters. And then we would be in the halls, and then we would talk about it. Between classes, we would like pass notes to each other and stuff like that. At lunchtime, when we weren't playing in an actual game, we would run mock combats in Robotech. And that really led me down that path of getting into Rifts and then being a part of that 4-year Dog Boy campaign. So I would say it was probably that. And when you get into high school, you really have no idea who you are or the people around you. You've got all these. I mean, you're a boy, and you walk in, and there's men walking around, and you're just like, shit. And so to find that one guy was really awesome. And yeah.
Mm-hmm. See, I grew facial hair very early, so I was one of the men walking around.
Oh,
So
yeah, I can't grow facial hair at all. So, I mean, not even if I tried.
that's one of the common experiences of like being into this stuff that I don't track with, because I had a very quick growth spurt that then leveled out because I'm short now. I had a beard before everyone else. I had, as you guys can see, I had chest hair way before everyone else. My nickname when I was a freshman in high school was Chewbacca because I was hairier than everyone else. So
Right.
I can't relate to the being a late bloomer thing. I was an early bloomer, but
Yeah, I have no idea how this started, but all through like maybe starting 6th or 7th grade, all of my teachers, didn't matter who they were, they all called me Mr. Kraft. They never called me by my first name. Every teacher is just Mr. Kraft, Mr. Kraft, Mr. Kraft. And so then my friends, they picked up on it and they would call me Krafty or Velveeta Boy or various different things like that, right? And then um, uh, maybe 10, 11 years ago, one of the people who I was broadcasting with called me DJ Krafty, and it just stuck ever since. But I dropped the DJ part because that's pretentious.
mm-hmm, absolutely. And there are very few discs to jockey in this world,
Right.
so it doesn't really.
Exactly.
Yeah. Now the last question here before we jump into some 5e stuff. You've listened to the show enough to know that this is coming up. The answer can be
Right.
as philosophical or as sophomoric as you want it to be. But Crafty Matt Kraft, if you could put anything on a T-shirt, what would it be?
Read the fucking Dungeon Master's Guide.
There we go.
That's just it. So, I mean, I have it sitting right here just in case we need to reference it. But it's one of those things where your 5e game will improve 100% if you just looked for your answers in there. Because if you have a question about 5e and how to run a procedure, It's in the DMG. Just ask Max or anybody on the Legion of Myth server. I'm a dirty 5e apologist, but I can prove with screenshots that this stuff exists that nobody uses.
Hmm. Absolutely. Well, with the introductions out of the way, the way I want to start this conversation about 5e, um, each of us are going to go through, and I'll let you start because you're the guest. We're going to list our 5 favorite things about 5e, but then we're also going to counter that with our 5 least favorite things about 5e. So, what we'll do is kind of take it one and one. So, if you want to start with your first favorite thing about 5e, we'll begin there.
My favorite thing about 5e is the basic rules. The fact that they are free. It takes every character from level 1 to 20, or every class, rather, from level 1 to 20, with a single archetype. There's no feats. There's no real multi-classing, even though there's maybe rules in there. But it is a complete system with just the basic rules, and I'm not talking the SRD, but you can play a game of Dungeons and Dragons for free using those rules.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's something that's going to come up once I start doing short form videos. That's something that actually comes up in one of my videos, is the fact that there are so many different companies that now have essentially a free version of the game, and Wizards, to their credit, has made 5e one of those games. So the barrier to entry is very low for anyone who wants to kind of dip their toes in and see what this is all about. So that's a good call out there.
And you, what's your first one?
So my first one is the advantage disadvantage system.
Oh yeah, so that was going to be my number two. So, um, it it just makes things simple, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
So and as far as game mastering goes, you don't have to really think about it. It's like the player sits there and he's picking a lock, he's using tools, he has his stethoscope out, and the room is quiet. You're like, yeah, you can roll with advantage. You don't have to consult any tables or anything like that. It's fast.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And so much revolves around giving people that advantage or disadvantage. The conditions revolve around giving people advantage and disadvantage. It as a central mechanic on top of kind of the existing D&D infrastructure, the advantage system really is just a simple and effective way to get across you are having an easy time doing this, or you're having a real difficult time doing this.
Right. Um, well, my number two is your number one. So what's your number two?
So my number two here is it's easy to learn and it's easy to teach to other people.
So, but wouldn't that be the case with any role playing game?
Not necessarily. And maybe this is my bias against like crunchy games, but I found that there are even some kind of rules light games that are a little bit hard to parse and a little hard to like get people to understand who have never played a role-playing game before. I haven't had that much of a problem getting people who've never rolled a d20 to play and understand kind of the mechanics around 5e. I taught my father, who is like the boomeriest boomer that ever boomered, to play 5th edition D&D in a matter of minutes, and he had a great time with it.
So, I mean, that would be my number three, is not ease of play, but the fact that it is the 900-pound gorilla in the room.
Mm-hmm.
We often say that as a bad thing, but honestly, it can be a good thing in that it's so readily available. There's so much stuff out there for it, and there's so many teaching tools and different things that you can hand to players, and they can go off and they can research their own. They can find videos for it. It's so readily accessible that it is the best gateway drug right now into role playing,
Mm-hmm.
with the caveat that you do need to move on eventually.
Yeah. Yeah, the first the first time I made an attempt to get into role playing games was during the 4E days, and I never actually played because I want to play D&D, and so I started kind of looking into it, and everything I heard was just like, this edition of D&D is garbage. Just all the
Yeah.
hate spewed towards 4E, and I was just like, okay, maybe I don't need to play D&D right now.
What about, did you ever go into Pathfinder?
No. No, I
Oh,
didn't
okay.
know about Pathfinder. And again, that's just because D&D is so monolithic. I was only familiar with the game in that I saw it on the shelf of the comic shop where I bought my comics and I played HeroClix and Warhammer 40K.
Right.
So I knew that when people played this role playing game, because of media and because of just what people at the shop were playing, they're playing D&D, and so I didn't even think to look beyond D&D.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. That does. So you're number three.
My number three is that it's very modular. It's very easy to take apart and put back together with the pieces rearranged. It's easy to graft things onto it. It is a very moldable, pliable system that you can do a lot with.
Right. So my number four piggybacks off of that. The fact that there is so much third party out there, I've often said that third party is going to be the savior of 5e. You can build up 5e or tear it down into its most basic. And again, using the Dungeon Master's Guide, there's a lot of things in there that allow you to make your game more crunchy, harder, grittier, or just absolute bonkers gonzo. And so despite the fact that everybody says, "Oh, D&D shouldn't run everything," okay? It within the realms of fantasy, it can run almost any kind of fantasy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And it can even run, and I know this because I have actually played this, it can even run like space fantasy.
Yeah, oh yeah, and I'll talk about that later with as far as with one of my third party recommendations is that space fantasy. You mean like Starfinder kind of space
Yeah.
fantasy, not
Mhm.
not hardcore like The Expanse or Death in Space or something like that.
Right. Yeah. Not hard sci-fi, but
Yeah.
a good example of this. Todd Moonbounce, who's an old friend from when I was with Valor Studios, he's very involved in the Star Wars 5e movement, and
Oh.
Star Wars actually fits pretty well within the 5e ecosystem.
Yes. Sadly, I was burned on D20 Star Wars, so I can't. For me, it's West End games or nothing.
Right.
It's the die six or nothing.
Mhm.
So yeah, and I'm not even talking like expanded and revised. I'm talking the original two books, the core book and the blue source book. That's it. So nothing after that.
Mhm. And he's going to yell at me if I don't mention it, but yes, D&D 5e can be used to play modern fantasy, especially if you take advantage of the products made by one Victor Gorchev. Shill, bye, bye, bye. Everyone go out and back his Kickstarter when it launches.
I heard. Yeah, I heard that guy has a Kickstarter. So, and he's occasionally on a couple other podcasts. I think he's going to be on yours, right?
Yes, he is. Yes, he is. At the
Right.
end of this
Yeah.
month, he will be on the show.
Right. There you go, Victor. There's your plug. Uh, the last one, the last one would be that, and this is more personal, is that 5e got me back into tabletop gaming.
Mhm.
In that if it wasn't for the salesperson running the Pathfinder game, I wouldn't have gone and looked. Well, what's the current edition of D&D? And that was right when D&D Next had ended and they had released the core books. I still have first printings of my 5e books,
Mhm.
um, and it was having been out of it for a decade or more, the sense of wonder and awe that role playing brought back to my hobbies was just. I wish that I could go back. What is it? Oh God, is like 8 years now and
Yeah.
recapture that. Yeah, I wish I could go back and recapture that, because now unfortunately I'm jaded. I've been in the hobby long enough that I no longer see the wonder and awe, but all of the jaded bullshit.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's see. I'm on point number 4. Are you on point number 4
You're
now
on
as well?
5. You're on 5 now.
Oh, I'm on
Because
5?
I said, yeah,
Right.
well, I guess well, no, I was on 4. I just gave 5, so you need to give 2 more.
Okay. So my number 4 is that the game plays very quickly. Like the actual gameplay is pretty snappy, pretty breezy if you have the right rail setup as the dungeon master. It's very easy to kind of run a fast-paced game. There's not a lot to get you bogged down if you are on top of your players.
I'm gonna have to disagree with that. That's actually one of my negatives about 5e. But
Okay.
continue.
And then my last point, and this one might be a little bit controversial, and I'm actually going to undercut it immediately with my dislikes, but it is a good game for making players feel powerful and badass.
Yes, absolutely yes. And I know why you're going to undercut that, and that's one of my negatives as well.
Gotcha. So getting into the negatives now.
Well,
Which,
it's exact opposite of the reason that I said that I like the system. So basic 5e is just, it's so clean and so perfect. But then you get into 5e proper, and it just becomes so bloated.
Yeah.
How many races are there now?
way too many.
Yeah, way too many. There's too many subclasses. There's too many rules for you to take a dip into this or a dip into that, and then all of a sudden you're way overpowered. And honestly, a lot of the rules are written such that it can take advantage of this very power gamery thing. And unfortunately, it's up to the dungeon master to kind of rein that stuff in. And one of my favorite rules, which unfortunately after Tasha's is no longer exist, but was the player's handbook +1, is when you made a character, you made it with the player's handbook plus one other extra source, and that's it. So, and then Tasha's came in and kind of consolidated everything from every other book, so everybody would just use player's handbook plus Tasha's and be done with it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And this gets into what my number 2 is, so I'll go ahead and say my number 2 is my number 1. And that's, there's just too many goddamn options.
Yes. Yes. Agreed.
And this is from the perspective of someone who's played the game for a long time and someone who has had to bring someone into the hobby and, show them the books, even just saying, let's focus on the player's handbook. Forget all this other stuff, because I know that's way too much. Just focusing on the player's handbook. There are too many choices. Too many races, too many subclasses, too many feats. And what it comes down to is not only does it create analysis paralysis of what kind of character do I want to create here, it also makes for some very suboptimal, not quite bad choices. It's not like 3E or 3.5 in that there are outright wrong options. But if you choose just a couple, like, off-the-wall things, you've got a character that doesn't really hang with the rest of the party. So if those options suck, why are they there? Why even give that choice at all if it's just a bad choice to make?
Right. And that goes into my number 2, which is feats. I hate feats. I hate multi-classing. There's a reason why the player's handbook says they are options. Is that the right combination of feats can cripple a dungeon master's campaign, or even the right number of feats with a particular class. One of those classes being the ranger. The ranger, as it's written in the player's handbook, is awful. Yeah. And with natural explorer, if you had a adventure that took place mostly in a forest, and that ranger decided to take forest as their home base or their natural explorer, that you were done. They would never get lost. They would never run out of food. They would never run out of water, and they would always make it to their destination unharmed because of this one option that was in the ranger that just completely destroyed gameplay. Another one, of course, being Sentinel. If you use Sentinel with Polearm Master, you might as well never hit a particular player, because the enemy will stop 10 feet before the player, and every time that they try to enter the range of the player, they'll take an attack of opportunity and then get stopped by Sentinel again. It's stupid. There are some options that are just, it makes the game unplayable.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will answer Indigo Dragon in talking about my second point. My second point here is 5e makes you too powerful too quickly. And
yes.
And to answer Indigo Dragon, you feel like a badass because it's very easy to survive until 5th level, and then past 5th level, you're basically unstoppable. So yeah, you are playing with training wheels in that everything's kind of nerfed to get you to that point. But once you get past 5th level, and even it's worse once you get past 10th level, at that point you're not just a superhero, you're like a powerful superhero. You're like Thor or Superman at 10th level.
Max from Legion of Myth always says that it is hero to superhero.
Yeah.
And I agree with that. Your characters start off with, some subclasses already start off with their archetype, or their subclass, which just makes them insanely powerful. The Gloomstalker Ranger. I play a lot of Rangers. I play a lot of clerics. So, but the Gloomstalker Ranger is a death machine at level 1.
Yeah,
and at level 3, right? Which is still tier 1. That's when you're supposed to be fighting goblins and rats and like little kobolds and stuff like that. But a Gloomstalker Ranger could take on a young dragon easy.
Yeah.
And it's scary. But for that, it does lead down that path of being a great introductory game, because you can be super powerful at the beginning. And I think that Wizards the reason that they made characters powerful at the beginning was so that you didn't have to get 3, 4, 5 levels in before you had the quote unquote fun. Not realizing that that initial period of playing a role-playing game ends very quickly. That honeymoon phase,
yeah,
and then you want a challenge.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, Max says hero to superhero. I call it the medieval Justice League. That's my phrase. Yeah. But yeah, there is no sense of challenge to the gameplay of 5e past a certain level. And I've played a Gloomstalker Ranger, and you're not lying. You're functionally invisible, standing still. If not at 3rd level, then by 5th level, you can't even be seen by magical means. I'm pretty sure at that point.
And then if you take that one dip into thief, oh man, sneak attack.
Yeah.
It's that life cleric that takes one dip into druid. And good berries, the good berry debate,
Yeah, absolutely.
You had mentioned, and this is my third point, you had mentioned that 5e was fast and easy to run. And I'm here to tell you it's not.
Yep.
It's not fast. When you get into combat, the game bogs down so much. It's so incredibly slow that's when you start having players like look around the room or jump on their phone. because every turn is a slog to get through, and especially when you have a lot of enemies. Um, just take the first encounter of Lost Mines of Phandelver. It's goblin arrows, right? You have four goblins and possibly four adventurers. Those goblins are going to fire and hide, and it's up to the players to find out where they are. So they have to do their spot checks and perception checks, and it slows everything down. It just does. It's a slow game in combat.
Yeah,
In combat.
and I should qualify what I meant by it's fast to run. It's fast to roll your dice, add your modifiers. That part, you don't have to pull out your Texas Instruments graphing calculator to add up all your crap just to like take one attack like you do in some games. That's what I meant by fast.
Right.
But you're absolutely right that, especially like with hit points being what they are in 5e, it takes forever just to kill an enemy, and that's why like and we're going to talk about this later, but stuff like 5e hardcore mode takes away your constitution modifier to your hit points, because that way you're not just trading blows back and forth ad nauseum just to get through one combat.
Right. Yeah. It's a slog. I mean, you go up against an adult dragon or anything. It's like, oh, takes forever.
To answer L here, I don't think it's faster than like basic D&D. So that, you make a good point there. It's faster than Pathfinder. I'll put it that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
So my number 3 is 5e material contradicts itself. And I say that it's not just like errata comes out and says, what we meant to say here was actually this, but it's like you have the core 3 books, which in my mind, that should be like your foundation. This is what the game is built on, is Player's Handbook, Dungeon Master's Guide, Monster Manual. But then you have Xanathar's Guide, and then Tasha's Cauldron, which just go, that stuff in the Player's Handbook and the DMG, nah, don't worry about that.
That especially happens in Tasha's, but with Tasha's, most of what people are talking about is 3 pages in that whole book.
Yeah.
And at the very top of it, it says optional. These are optional rules. And that's a big thing that people don't understand. And that is my point.
Yeah.
In that, that would be my point number 4, is that people don't understand that there are optional rules. So many players out there want to use every single player option that is available, but will not allow the dungeon master to use the options provided in the DMG. Options such as the insanity tables or the critical injury tables. They just don't want that or they don't want to use the encumbrance rules or tracking arrows. There is this mentality with 5e that, well, 5e should be, I don't like that rule, so I'm going to throw it out because it's not fun, rather than playing with the rule for a little while and realizing that, yeah, that little unfun thing like tracking encumbrance, it may not be fun, but once you get to that dragon horde and have to figure out how to get all that shit back, that's fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's this weird thing that happens kind of with the discourse around 5e. I remember when Tasha's came out and people online were saying the race stuff, where essentially all races are reduced to blobs of gray goo that you can mold into whatever you feel like they should be. When people on Twitter were like, it says optional, you can't do that at my table, people would lose their minds over...
Yeah.
Like the concept of Rule 0 is lost on so many people that even if it doesn't say optional in, next to the rule, the whole thing, this is all arbitrary. Even the stuff that's printed and published is arbitrary. And if your GM decides to do it differently, then that's how you're doing it at their table. That is lost on so many people. And even when it says optional in there, they think because it's printed in a book that WotC published with a D and ampersand and a D on it, that it's the law of the Medes and the Persians, as my 5th grade teacher used to say.
Right. And what's funny is at the very beginning of the player's handbook, it specifically says that the dungeon master is the arbiter of the game.
Yeah.
They're the rule maker. They if the rules are a guide, but it's still the dungeon master's table.
Mm-hmm.
And so many players that now they almost bully the dungeon master. Yes. I often say that in this post Tasha's era, that dungeon masters are now service providers. They are not players at the table, and it saddens me.
Mm-hmm. So, go ahead.
Oh no, you go first.
I was going to say, now we get to number 4s. What would be your number 4 for this?
Oh, I already did my number 4. It's your number 4. My number 4 was the was the player options.
Gotcha. All right, so my number 4, and we've already talked in and around this. My number 4 is the community, and this is the big one. This is the reason why we all kind of pile on 5e at times, because the community that's been built up around 5e is full of, 1, people who don't actually play 5e, 2, people who think they know how 5e works, think they know how the game runs, despite, 1, not having played 5e, and then 3, they then want to tell you what you should and should not do at your table, even though they've never met you, they've never played at your table, and they never will play at your table. It's the tyranny of the omnipotent moral busybody. I know I've made this reference several times. It's a great C.S. Lewis quote about how it's better to live under robber barons because the robber baron sleeps. Occasionally he's satisfied with his ill-gotten gains, but the omnipotent moral busybody will never leave you alone because they are bothering you with the approval of their own conscience. So the people who and to answer L here, I don't think there's an RPG community myself because communities are inherently small and local. But the people who identify as being in the 5e community with air quotes, for those of you listening, they are some of the worst people to interact with because of how fanatical they are.
That does exist in other communities as well.
Yes.
Look at the Bro SR.
Yes, the Bro SR.
Or the priors of Gygax, who lettered the law of 1E. But the issue is that because 5e is that 900-pound gorilla in the room, that just means that there are so many more moral busybodies, as you said, to tell you how to game. And one thing that we try to get across to these people is when we tell them that, hey, it's my table, my rules, we're not trying to shut them out. We're just trying to say, hey, I'm going to play the way that I want to play. You play the way that you want to play, and I'm good. Once you start telling me how to play my table, that's when I'm going to come back and take a keen eye at what you're doing in the community. And like you said, come to find out, a lot of these people play theory D&D. They're not actually playing D&D.
L, if we start defining what the Bro SR is, then we're going to get into all of my bugbears about the OSR, just kind of as a whole, and the infighting that occurs within it, and how it reminds me very badly of another group that I'm a part of, that being libertarians. So we're not gonna. I'm not going to mess with. I'm not going to knock over that hornet's nest because it'll just be me ranting, and we won't actually get into defending 5e.
So that would be my number 5. My number 5 is that people don't read the rules. Mm-hmm. The rules are more than a guideline. I mean, you can go onto a football field and play football, but then you say, you know what? I don't like I don't like the fact that there's downs. I should be able to drive forward for as long as it takes until I reach the end zone. So we're going to throw out the downs, or we're going to throw out the lateral pass. You know, these are rules are there to govern how you play, and from that governance comes the fun. But specifically, people they don't read the rules, or they say that the rules just don't exist. The the biggest thing that I notice that people do is they'll walk into a room in game and go, I roll a perception check, what do I see? And that's not what the rules say.
Right.
So right here on page 178 of the player's handbook, so everybody has this, it says finding a hidden object. When your character searches for a hidden object, such as a secret door or trap, the DM typically asks, that's the most important part, they ask, they're not being told, you to make a wisdom or perception check. So such a check can be used to find hidden details or other information and clues that you may have otherwise overlooked, because the second part of that is in most cases you need to describe where you are looking in order for the DM to determine your chance for success.
Right.
For example, a key is hidden beneath a set of folded clothes in the top drawer of a bureau. You tell the DM that you pace around the room looking at the walls and the furnitures for clues. You have no chance of finding the keys regardless of your wisdom check result. That's in the book. And yet people don't do that. They just walk into a room and they just say, I roll wisdom, I roll perception, or my passive perception is 15. What do I see? It's the biggest thing for me. And the biggest argument that I get online with people is that the rules are there to govern the game so that fun can emerge.
Yeah.
Because when you don't follow rules, it's anarchy, and then that you wonder why your games fall apart in 6 sessions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the opposite corollary to what I was saying last time I was on Legion of Myth, when I was talking about how role-playing games lean more towards the narrative side. The simulation side, the rules, the structure, has to be there as well. It's and I don't know how everyone feels. I am an adherent of Jordan Peterson, but his 2 books right now are about avoiding the excess of chaos and the excess of order. So that's where I feel like role-playing and most things in life come in, is you have to avoid the excesses of both, and the rules are important to keep everything reined in as far as the chaos of people just kind of going off in their own direction is concerned.
Yeah, and it just read the manual, read the books. The rules are there for a reason. Mm-hmm. So that's all I can say. That's why it's on my shirt.
Yep.
Well, not literally, but
absolutely.
So you're number 5.
My number 5, and this is purely like a personal preference thing. There is too much magic in and around all things in 5e.
That's a good one.
You can run low magic 5e. It involves cutting a lot of things out, but you can do it. However, there are certain classes, character types that should not have any magic involved. I don't like that the ranger has spells. I know that traditionally they've kind of always had at least druid or priest spells. I don't like it. A ranger is a man of the woods. I don't like that
fighters have.
Yeah.
Spider subclasses have spells.
Yeah, fighters can cast spells. I don't like. Again, this is me kind of attacking the foundations here. I think bards should be a subclass of rogue. I don't think they should have spells at all.
Yeah, going back to what was that? That was first edition that it was a subclass, right?
I think so.
Yeah. So somebody in chat will correct me and then call me fraud.
And I know that I think traditionally bards were made intentionally like impossible to get to, because you had to take 5 levels of fighter, and then like 5 levels of thief, and then 2 levels of druid or something like that, and then you could start leveling as a bard.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, that's another thing that doesn't exist in 5e is restrictions.
right.
There's no restrictions except one. There is one restriction, and again, nobody really follows that when it comes to multiclassing. Is that there are prime requisites for multiclassing, and you have to be a 13 in your prime requisite for the current class you're in, and a 13 prime requisite in the class that you're going into. And everybody just ignores that. They ignore it. And they just, oh, I'm going to multi-class all over the place. I'm going to make a character with 1 level in everything. And you can't, unless you have over a 13 in everything. You can't do that. But nobody does that. And the reason they don't do that, and I'm going to keep harping on this, is because, oh, it's not fun. It's not fun to have restrictions. And it's like, yes, it is. It's so much fun to have restrictions. When imagine the stories that you're going to tell when you're traveling from Waterdeep to Phandalin, and you run out of food, and you're having to forage, and your player, he's the ranger, but he misses that boar, and that boar runs into a cave, and then you go into the cave, and there's trolls in that cave. That is a story to tell.
Yeah.
But because people skip travel, or they skip encumbrance, they skip food tracking, these little emergent story things have been lost to the 5e community.
Yeah, absolutely. And Maliki, Castles and Crusades is on my list of things to check out. So at some point, I will be getting around to that.
But Maliki, we're defending 5e here,
Yes,
even though it doesn't sound like we are.
So to get into the defense of 5e, something that you kind of approached me with as we were crafting this episode is you believe, and I think have plenty of evidence to back this up, that there are essentially 3 distinct eras of 5e. So
Yes.
if you want to outline those for us and talk about how they kind of play with each other and feed into each other, I think that's a good place to kind of continue this conversation.
Pull those notes up here real quick. So the 3 eras of 5e are D&D Next, which lasts from before 2014, before the release of 5e, to about 2017, 2018. Then comes the Critical Role era of 5e, which then leads into the post-Tasha's era of 5e. And when taking a look at the evidence to support this, even though Critical Role really did start in 2015, it didn't start seeing a rise in followers and channel views until about 2018, in July of 2018, and then exploded in COVID, which with the Matt Mercer effect, which I know everybody hates that when they're talking about 5e, but there really is a Matt Mercer effect, that led to some design decisions that went into Tasha's, and then you have this whole post-Tasha's, which is where I really think the community gets very, very toxic towards each other.
Yeah.
And one table can't play the same way as another table, and they just clash against each other. And if you're not using all the rules from Tasha's, then you're a horrible person. Or if you're not using this particular option, you're a horrible person. Or if I decide that I want to limit my game to the basic 4 races of elf, dwarf, human, and halfling, then I'm a horrible person for some reason. And what we see is, of course, we see in the D&D Next era is the Player's Handbook, Monster Manual, Dungeon Master's Guide comes out, and then a few years later, Vola's Guide to Monsters, which we know in post-Tasha's era has had its lore completely stripped out because it was problematic. But it wasn't back in 2016 when it was written. And I still have yet to figure out why that is, other than, again, you have these eras of when D&D Next came out, it was a Forgotten Realms game. Yes, you could play in other things, but it was Forgotten Realms. And it wasn't until 2019 and Ravnica's Guide Ravnica's Guide, that they started exploring other universes and things like that. So I'm rambling a little bit here, but the you can even see this in the design decisions of their adventures, right? So you have, of course, Lost Mines of Phandelver, which I truly believe is going to go down as a D&D classic. It's going to be a classic just as, say, Into the Borderlands is, or Keep on the Borderlands is a classic, or Isle of Dread is a classic. Phandelver will be a classic that people will talk about for years after even Wizards of the Coast is done with Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
But, go ahead.
Oh, just to piggyback on that, Phandelver really is kind of this generation's answer to Against the Cult of the Reptile God. So
yeah, and or even like what was the Red Hand of Doom was another one, for third edition. I don't know what came out of fourth edition because I wasn't playing at the time. But when you look at Rise of Tiamat, Princes of the Apocalypse, Out of the Abyss, Curse of Strahd, Storm King's Thunder, Tomb of Annihilation, that all happened in that D&D Next era, those are very classic adventures.
Yeah.
I truly believe that Storm King's Thunder gets undue shit for being a bad adventure because it doesn't flesh out any of the descriptions of places or things that you're supposed to do, but it's a guidebook. It's one of those old classic adventure books where it's just going to present you with a bunch of information and you have to sit down as a dungeon master and kind of stitch it together for a game for your table and your players. Same thing with Tomb of Annihilation, which is a combination of Isle of Dread and Tomb of Horrors at the very end of it, but it's a sandbox adventure. And even Dungeon of the Mad Mage, right? It's a fantastic adventure. It is a mega dungeon, but nobody really talks about it because it doesn't handhold you through everything. And that bothers me a little bit. So when it isn't until the Critical Role era that you really start seeing the hand-holdy adventures. The adventures or the Wizards of the Coast design choices to follow a book or a movie. Before that, the adventures were more sandboxy, a little less hand-holdy.
Yeah, the Critical Role era, and I've not seen a single episode of Critical Role. I will not start anytime soon, probably ever. I have nothing against the people on Critical Role, but the worst thing that Critical Role did was it made people forget that this is a game and think that it's a TV show. And
yes.
Every single game that's kind of come out of that, all the people's attitudes towards how the game is run, and even how now WotC designs their products, it's like they're designing for something where you can create your own stream. And streams make up a very small percentage of the games that are played out there. This is a game for people at their tables, and it should be a game for people at their tables.
Well, look at the design decisions now for D&D 1 by making everything digital and having their own virtual tabletop. They're as you said, it's going more streaming. But I'm here to tell you that in the Critical Role era, there was a couple of products that were stealth released. I had them sitting next to me, but I don't anymore. And look them up. One of them is the Wilderness Kit. The Wilderness Kit is a fantastic DM screen. First, the art is top notch. I don't know who the artist is, and I don't know what basement they locked him in, but they need to get that artist back because the art on the Wilderness Kit is fantastic. And it includes water trackers and ration trackers, item trackers. It includes procedures for hex crawling, going from hex to hex and getting lost. The D&D used to be about getting lost, and then like we were going to we were supposed to be heading to the next town, but we got lost and we ended up at this chthonic temple instead. And it's like, okay, well, let's mark that down on the map and let's get back to it, So, but and why they stealth released this product? It was in 2020 that it came out. Why they did that, I don't know. But it has weather tables on it. It has random encounter tables, and it has morale tables. How far away a random encounter happens, and sight lines and surprise, and all of these things that I remember from my BX days, and Beckby days of, wow, this is again that feeling of wonder and awe. But they didn't market it. It came out I think it came out at the same time as was it Witchlight? No, it was Explorer's Guide to Wildermount. It came out that same time, and you can see the design shift to, again, like you were saying, more of a streaming market. I don't want to say railroady market, but it's a railroad.
Yeah.
In adventure design, instead of giving dungeon masters tools to create their own adventures, which is what I think Wilderness Guide did. The second one is the Dungeon Kit. Again, fantastic art. But the one thing the Dungeon Kit had was something that I haven't seen in forever, which was geomorphs, right? At little tiny cards that had, on one side, it was one type of terrain. On the other side, it was another. And you would just randomly shuffle them and deal them out. And then that was your dungeon for the night, right? And then you could design your adventure around there. And it was random encounters and procedures for dungeon crawling. Okay, these things that the OSR say, oh yeah, no, we need dungeon crawling procedures, we need hex crawling procedures. That's what makes D&D fun. Well, I'm here to tell you those things are in 5e, but you got to look for them. They're there. But again, go back to your Dungeon Master's Guide, right?
Yeah.
Read the Dungeon Master's Guide because they're there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what you're getting at here is really the core problem with 5e as it stands now. At the beginning, it was one thing, and then somewhere in the middle, right around, I guess in response to Critical Role's popularity and kind of jumping on all these different licensed properties that were also very heavily tied in with D&D, stuff like Rick and Morty and Stranger Things.
Yes. COVID had a big thing to do with it, too.
Yeah, and COVID as well. At that point, Wizards made a hard pivot, and I think the reason no one ever talked about those two wilderness and dungeon kits is they didn't fit with the new direction. And they weren't something that, these influencers were using on their streams because they didn't need to. They're streaming. It's wilderness exploration in the stream is very tedious and boring because it's meant to be experienced. It's not meant to be watched because it's a game. It's not a show. It's not a movie.
Right. And that is also why now you have so many people that they want to play elves, but they don't want to play elves, or they want to play that orc or half orc, but they're not really playing a half orc. They're playing a race in or they're playing a human in a funny skin suit, right? There's in the stripping out of the lore of Volos. You lose this, again, the sense of awe and wonder, like picking up one of those books and reading it. It's like, oh man, there's so many ideas, why the demons are fighting the devils. Now that all of that stuff is gone, it's just, you have demons and devils. And yes, some dungeon master can put a demon and a devil in the same encounter, right? And that's fine. That if that works for your homebrew table, that's okay. But that's not the way it's supposed to be. There's a certain history that comes with D&D that I don't think is being respected. Mm-hmm. But it's that history that gives the game its identity. Yeah. But everybody wants to think that identity is what skin suit your character is wearing, or what backstory your character has made, or what what class abilities, and then that's just not how it is.
Mm-hmm. Indigo Dragon makes a good point here in talking about this hard pivot that WotC made. Um, Kind of the de-emphasis of Mike Merles, who shepherded 5e when it first came out, and replacing him essentially with Jeremy Crawford as the Pope of D&D, as it were. I guess co-Pope with Matt Mercer, based on the way people act. That really also brought about a change in the community and the way that people looked at the game, because Mike Merles had a very old school eye in designing 5e, and basically 5e was born of the OSR movement that sprung up around 3.5 and 4e, the original OSR movement. But then once things kind of took off in a different direction, that was no longer part of their vision, and they basically gave them the boot.
Right, and then it became what Saturday morning cartoon can we make today?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, 5e went from, it wasn't pulpy fantasy, but it was certainly high fantasy. It wasn't Tolkien fantasy either, but it went from high fantasy, heroic fantasy to Saturday morning cartoon.
Yeah,
in somewhere in the span of Critical Role to post Tasha's.
And I think the core of what we're getting at here, and we've basically said as much multiple times, if you look at 5e with just kind of the essential products, and when it comes to essential products, I will say Player's Handbook, Dungeon Master's Guide, Monster Manual, and then I think Volos of the expansions. Volo, because of that lore, because of the kind of explanations of this is the psychology and the social makeup of these major monsters. Those are your four kind of main source books, and then the kits that you mentioned. With those tools, you can run an old school flavored game. You can run, like I was talking about, like OSR 5e. You can do so with some of the great third party products as well, which we'll get to towards the end of the episode here. But it's this other stuff. It's this extra bloat that's come about essentially in response to people going nuts on Twitter that has made 5e go downhill. And it's that stuff that's dragging the community down and dividing the people who play 5e into their various camps where we are now, and everyone just kind of hates each other. Even people who play 5e hate other people who play 5e because of where they draw lines.
I would add Xanathar's Guide in there because Xanathar's Guide is a collection of unearthed arcana.
Yeah.
Right. It's a collection of bonus rules, and again, everything in there says optional. You don't have to use it, but some of the tables that are in there are really useful tables. They just are. And also for the player that's looking for domain play and setting up a home base, give Acquisitions Incorporated a look. The rules in there are for setting up a franchise of Acquisitions Incorporated. But if you strip out the fact that it's a Penny Arcade's Acquisitions Incorporated actual play, and you just look at it, okay, so this is what it's going to take to build my stronghold up, and then all of the little things that go into it. That book is also very, very good. And again, it happens right there that book came out right there at the beginning of Critical Role's success, and is one of those books that WotC just kind of just went, okay, well, we're done with that. That's another thing that bothers me. Oh man, sorry. I don't mean to ramble, but it's like WotC sits there and goes, "Hey man, you got to be really excited for this product. This product is like the shit. Buy this product, pre-order this product, and I swear to God, this is going to be like the best product ever." And then on launch day, they go, "All right, done with that. Let's get them hyped for the next thing."
It's the Google model, where
Yeah.
it's all about the launch. It's all about the launch, and then once it launches, forget it. Don't worry about supporting it. All that matters is a new product came out.
And that has led to real quality issues. Again, I talk about Storm King's Thunder, right? Probably one of the most hated modules for 5e, but I think people look at it wrong. They don't look at it as a guidebook. They're trying to read it like it's a module from beginning to end.
Yeah.
It's a story from beginning to end, right? But look at all the information that's packed in those pages as opposed to all of the information that's packed into Spelljammer, which is the latest release, right? Spelljammer was hyped up so much by Wizards of the Coast, and then when it landed with such a wet thud that they quickly swept it under the rug, and they really haven't talked about Spelljammer. Now they're hyping up Dragonlance, which I'm afraid that Dragonlance is going to be the same wet thud because they're going to put enough nostalgia bait in there to make old people, such as me, such as Max, such as you, go out and buy the book and then go, man, what did I just waste my money on?
Yeah.
Whereas before, I actually looked forward to new releases. The last big release that I was excited for was Avernus and the Descent into Avernus, only because I'm also a big Mad Max fan, and driving hell cars around and throwing soul coins into furnaces and hearing them scream as your car gets more power. I did an entire campaign based around just traveling around Avernus and pitting Bahamut against Tiamat.
Yep. Absolutely. But again, this goes into one of the biggest problems with the way that D&D is being managed now, and you see this with tons of brands now. All the major brands are like this, whether it's Disney with Marvel and Star Wars, Warner Brothers is trying this with DC Comics. Everything now has to be this lifestyle brand, and whenever you hear something touted as a lifestyle brand, what they mean is a religion.
Yeah, and I'll be honest. When I jumped back into role playing, I fell victim to that. Anything that came out, it's like, oh man, they've got this. They have these official D&D dice. I got to get those, and they have the D&D. They've got the D&D dice roller. I got to get that, or they've got the D&D flamethrower. I got to get that. It's marketing. So I fell victim to it early on before I realized that I didn't use this stuff when I was a youth. I don't need this stuff again. But you're right. It has become a lifestyle brand. It's I'm wearing the shirt. I'm drinking out of the mug. I have D20 stickers on my car.
Yeah.
The first thing that I say to people when I meet them is hi, I'm Mr. Smith and I play D&D. It's that you wear. Oh, you don't even need to tell people you play D&D because I mean you keep you keep a tube of dice hanging around your neck. People just know because that's your thing. You're the D&D guy.
Yep. You've got your stringy long hair and your leather wrist cuffs, because you can pull off that look too, don't you know?
Right. See, I don't fault Matt Mercer. I really don't. And I think that people who watch Critical Role and watch Matt Mercer specifically get the wrong lessons from Matt Mercer. The lesson that you should get from Matt Mercer is listen to your players, like look at them and listen to them, react to what they're reacting to, and be enthusiastic about it.
Yep.
Right? Whereas I think everybody else gets this this idea that I have to be this master story crafter. I have to be able to tell all of these narratives. I have to be able to do this. I have to be able to weave together this twisted story that's wheels within wheels. And that's not how at the end of every episode, I have to shock people with a cliffhanger. That's what people are getting from Matt Mercer, and they shouldn't. What they should be getting is that Matt Mercer, he he provides a environment where fun and interesting things can happen.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. But the other thing that people need to realize, and I think a lot of the people who are watching this right now know this, so this is for anyone who is in the 5e world, but doesn't, you know, you're starting to feel disillusioned by everything. WotC is going the way that all of these major companies are going. The Star Wars fans that are upset that Star Wars isn't what it was, they're falling victim to this as well. Companies have taken on this strategy that Krafty described to me as all the money in the world.
Yes. So,
yeah. Go ahead.
The it happened right around COVID or so, and or as it may have, you even said Apple, so it may have happened even before that. Is this idea that Wizards of the Coast or any corporation needs to have all of the money in the world? They have and this happens in publicly traded companies with boardrooms, is they look and they see, okay, we have billions of dollars or millions of dollars or even hundreds of thousands of dollars, but they're like, but those people over there, they're not playing our game. How do we get them engaged with our product?
Mm-hmm.
And so they go and they poll them, and the people say, well, we don't really like playing role-playing games because of this or that. Then the boardroom changes it so to bring those people in, not realizing that they're leaving their other customers behind, but they don't care because they already have that money. They're going after that money.
Mm-hmm.
And then it just becomes this cycle of a heroin addict chasing the dragon.
Yeah.
The boardroom is constantly chasing all the money in the world. They are not happy with the customer base that they have. They need to have everybody playing their game. And what I mean by everybody is I'm talking even the people who just absolutely don't care about role-playing. Well, we're going to make you care about role-playing. Just tell us how to do it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And the way that they do it is very insidious, and it kind of gets into this ideological capture that you see all over all media. Just the way that people talk about every little piece of media as if it's the most important thing in history, and how if you don't like this particular thing, it's not just that, this isn't for you, it's you're a bad person, you're evil.
Yeah.
If you like this but don't like this, and you don't want to be evil, right? So you want to stay on board. They are constantly changing the product so that it's not just not for you, it's not for anyone. Because once they feel like they have the money of the new audience, they're going to abandon them and, keep chasing the dragon, like you said. But the way they go about it is this like crusader, Spanish Inquisition mentality of, if you're not fully on board with every new change we're going to make, yesterday's good Catholic is today's heretic, as it were. So they're going to burn you at the stake now. And it doesn't matter how much money you've given to this machine, it's going to roll over you the same way it rolls over everyone. So stop giving them your money.
To be fair, I don't think it's Wizards of the Coast necessarily doing that, at least not the boardroom. Because in a publicly traded company, the one thing that you don't want to do is you don't want to piss off somebody enough to where they stop spending money.
Right.
And there's enough fools out there that will spend their money on anything that has 5e on it because it's 5e.
Yep.
But what the boardroom listens to is they don't listen to the right people. The boardroom will see people crying on Twitter or Facebook or even in game stores and conventions that, well, this is a problem, this is a problem, this is a problem. And in boardroom thinking, in corporate thinking, it's, if this is a problem, then they're not spending money. Right. We have to change the problem so they can spend the money. Mm-hmm. And that is the dragon that keeps getting chased, is that there are some people that have a problem that will never be fixed. It will never make them happy. And being a salesman, you have to realize that because I'm a car salesman, which is probably the worst kind of salesman there is. But eventually, when somebody comes in and takes a look at your car, you can either accept the fact that they don't like your car, right? Or you can spend all day with them and then miss the person coming in the door who wants your car. Mm-hmm. And that's what's happening to WotC right now. Is WotC is so focused on the people who don't want the car that they're missing the 2 or 3 sales of the people that they can actually make.
Yeah.
And the money that they can actually collect. Mm-hmm. And that is it's that weird backwards corporate think. And somebody needs to tell WotC that. I'm sure they have. But again, boardroom mentality is, I already have your money. I want that money.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think part of it, and part of the reason why it ends up taking on the bent that I described, the kind of religious inquisition bent, is WotC is turning to these ideologues basically and saying, you're the ones who need, or the boardroom saying, you are on Twitter, you seem plugged into all this, you change it, you get this money for us. And it's those people who are driving the really nasty part of it, because they've been given way too much power over this giant brand, this giant all-encompassing brand that is now essentially being used as a platform for a crusade.
Right. And it's that fallacy of, I'm listening to my customers.
Yeah.
And I keep telling everybody this, that everybody's all, well, WotC is a quote unquote woke company, or they're social justice warriors. I don't believe that. I mean, there are probably members in WotC that are, but at the very top, WotC is owned by Hasbro, that has investors that they have to cater to.
Yep.
And those investors want all the money in the world, and that trickles down to, well, who is the loudest and most vocal group? It's the ones on Twitter. It's the ones on Facebook or Tumblr or Instagram. And so you have to pivot to try to capture those people. Now, much like Doctor Who, and I use Doctor Who as an example of this because 10 years ago, you had Tea-aboos everywhere. People would be wearing, they would be wearing the suit, or they would have the little TARDIS. I know. They on the car. My other car is a TARDIS, right? And the reason for that is because they had a couple of hot doctors, Matt Smith and various other, they had this young redhead that was on there, and it was all of the rage, right? Well, then what happened? Okay, those people left the show. The Tea-aboos had nothing left to mine from the lifestyle that was Doctor Who, and they all left. And now BBC is trying to look and scan and like, okay, well, where do we go from here? Well, I guess we have to go back to our base. We have to go back to our fans, because those people never left. And I see that happening with Dungeons and Dragons eventually. Yeah. And I'm already starting to see that happen with 1D&D. I'll give you a great example, and I'm sure that he's watching, but Scott's son, okay? His son is not happy with 1D&D. His son is a diehard of 5e. And there's a couple of there's a couple of videos out there where Scott's going over the 1D&D playtest, and his son and his friend rip it apart. Mm-hmm. And so I have this feeling that when 1D&D happens, WotC is really going to see that, oh man, okay, we put in this new doctor and nobody likes it. We changed it too much. We made metachlorians. It's all of this stuff where it's like, oh, we went one bridge too far, and they're going to have to pivot back to their base. And I'm waiting for those days, to be honest with you, because I still enjoy Dungeons and Dragons, even if people like Max say that we're playing commie role playing game 7345. But I enjoy it. And I enjoy bringing people to my 5e table.
Yeah, the Scott's kid is a 5e grognard is the term
Right.
that I've been hearing now.
Yeah.
But the reason to clarify for everyone out there, the reason I made the gun to my head gesture when he mentioned the Teaboos, because that was high school for me, and I was
Oh,
right in the center of that because I was a nerd in high school 10 years ago. So the Doctor Who Teaboo stuff, that was Super Who Lock, that was all kind of mixed in with the stuff that I was getting into. And I have constant cringe flashbacks of the like 16-year-old girls that I was hanging out with when I was 16, uh, just talking about jammy Dodgers and a whole bunch of British stuff they never actually understood.
right.
Yeah, so that was
Yeah.
like the peak of like cringe high school for me, and so that was my gun to my head gesture there
And
because
I think that's where we are with 5e right now.
yeah,
Is we're at that cringe level, but honestly, it's going to be kids, like Scott's kid, who is going to be the savior of D&D, because they're going to be the ones who are buying the product's nest and going to tell WotC that, hey, no, we don't want this.
right,
This is not the direction that we want to go.
absolutely, absolutely. Now, to kind of round out our conversation here and bring it back to some of the positives of 5e, one thing that we mentioned is there is a lot of good third party stuff that works really well with 5e and really is transformative for 5e. It makes 5e a different experience, but still, one that's very much worth playing and worth exploring. So let's talk about some of these products that we have
Yeah,
that,
because third party is going to be the savior of 5e,
yeah,
and I even have a prediction when all of this is over. So, but I guess I'll start. Um, should you ever want to experience what old school is, then really you have no further to look than Goodman Games' original adventures reincarnated. So this is Into the Borderlands, which is B1, B2. This is such a fantastic product because it gives you the original adventures in print and then updates the adventures for 5e, including in their interviews with the original writers, original artists. But truly, this is about as old school as you're going to get for 5e. And when running this, like pairing a good wine, I highly recommend that you stick to basic D&D or basic 5e, and don't get into even the player's handbook or anything other than just basic 5e,
yeah.
because that's how this was designed to run.
I will start with, and I will show them together because they essentially go together. When it comes to stripping out the nonsense from really all role-playing games and get to, kind of what makes games fun, look no further than Index Card RPG.
Yeah.
Especially with 5e, Hanker and Fernell is really good at just, this can go, this can go, this can go. Here's everything stripped down, simplified. Now you are essentially unshackled, have your fun. And along...
Um,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
with Index Card RPG, it started off with just rules for basically bringing zones into 5e. Instead of using a gridded map, it was just you would write a location or a room on index cards, and you would play that way. And honestly, it's the best blend of theater of the mind and tactical gameplay that is out there.
Yeah.
So I agree with that.
And going along with it, another Runehammer product that I've talked about a lot, if you want 5e to be deadlier and a lot more simplified and a lot more similar to what an old school game would be, 5e hardcore mode. That's what it was designed to do. It's a very good product. It caps levels. It simplifies a lot of things.
Gets rid of death saves.
Yeah. It gets rid of death saves. It gets rid of constitution modifiers on hit points. It really is a great tool for just, okay, you want to play OSR with a 5e skeleton, 5e hardcore mode.
Another product to piggyback on that would be Professor Dungeon Master's his Deathbringer rules.
Yep.
It's just it's a 6-panel pamphlet that you print out, and it's fantastic. So for 5e, and honestly, run into the Borderlands using hardcore mode or into the Deathbringer rules. So on the opposite side, if you want to get nuts, I mean, you really want to go nuts. This is another one that I recommend. It's Arcana of the Ancients. It is from Monte Cook Games, and it brings the world of Numenera into 5e. But it's not Numenera; it's the technology of Numenera. And there's several books out there, several bestiaries out there, and there's even an adventure, and you can drop a dread destroyer in the middle of the Sword Coast and basically change power dynamics in the Sword Coast forever just by just by dropping that in. One thing that I've used this book for is in my Phandelver game. Instead of it being the Spellforge, right? Mm-hmm. They go into Wave Echo Cave and they find this long lost technology that is been lost to the ancients, and they unlock a dread destroyer that begins marching towards Phandalin, and it worked out fantastic, and was a great climax to the Phandelver. Mm-hmm.
Next up for me, you guys know that Levi Combs and I are boys, but
right.
The Phylactery is a great zine series. Just if you want to get weird, if you want direct access to that like nest of craziness that is the brain of Levi Combs, and you want to import that into your 5e games, the Phylactery is your entry point. There's all kinds of crazy magic items, character archetypes, mini dungeons, monsters, just all kinds of craziness that shows up in the Phylactery, and it's ready to just drop into any game, but especially 5e.
Yeah, and Levi is such an amazing guy. It was awesome when you had him on. Mm-hmm. And so I'm a big fan of Levi. He knows it. So yeah, I follow. He's got a current Kickstarter going now for a new 5e adventure, which is awesome. Mm-hmm. So one complaint that people often have with at least the D&D Next era and the Critical Role era was that Forgotten Realms was so kitchen sink high magic that it sort of lost that medieval appeal, which is why I really got into Midgard, right? Midgard is it's a medieval Europe, a fantasy medieval Europe setting that has plenty of faction play, intrigue. You have kingdoms fighting kingdoms. And it reminds me a lot of a kind of a combination of some of the like older Greyhawk stuff, but mixed with Birthright. Yeah. You know, because you have all of this Ender Kingdom play. So if honestly, Kobold Press, I mean, they killed it with Midgard, and they've got several books out for this, and I think this is going to be a real savior of 5e.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to break from what I have over here for just 1 second, because sure. The next stuff is also Planet X, and I want to break that up a little bit. But there are two products. One is called Spaceships and Starworms, and it's basically a third-party answer to Starfinder for 5e. It's a great kind of space fantasy edition. The books, it's a phone book, but
Yeah.
it's a great edition. It adds spaceship combat. Everything works well within 5e. It's a great edition, and as an addendum to that, also the kind of free community around Star Wars 5e is very good. If you want to try Star Wars in 5e, it's a great place to go. I know there's a lot of love out there for Saga Edition, for the West End game, Star Wars stuff.
Yeah.
All of that is very good. But if you want to stick with 5e, an adventure in a galaxy far, far away, then Star Wars 5e is a great system.
Yeah. I can't get past D20 Star Wars.
Fair
Class-based Star Wars. But I believe you. So and I'll certainly check it out. But what's one of the complaints that you had about 5e was that as you grow in levels, you get way too powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what you need this for. So Bran Colonia, right? If you like the stories of Fafford and the Grey Mouser, you like being a knave rather than being an adventurer, then this spaghetti fantasy game is for you. Levels only go 1 to 6. You use the classes, you use the races or heritages that are in this book, and then you use the supplement rules. This is not a full conversion, but it's a partial conversion of 5e. And it really gives you that that knave roguish feel. It is even said in the book that a character that levels past level 6 is either retired or they die. You kind of take your pick because, I mean, honestly, if living the life of a knave, you should never get to above maybe level 6.
Yeah. And then my last two that I want to mention here, again, Planet X Games has a lot of great 5e adventures. You guys have heard me talk about how an occurrence at Howling Crater is the only adventure that's made me actually dry heave. But Glimmering Crypt of the Iron King is a great dungeon crawl. It's one of his more recent things. It's not as out there as some of his stuff, but it's definitely a cool adventure with a great premise. And then as far as high-level play goes, Escape from Skullcano Island is one of the best high-level adventures for 5e out there. As you can see, there's kaiju, there's all kinds of crazy stuff, there's great artwork that goes along with it. So if you want like a high-level adventure with lots of craziness, with cultists and giant monsters and an island hex crawl, Escape from Skullcano Island is going to be for you.
Yeah. When I got that, we're finishing up my 5e campaign with my current group right now. We're looking to play something else. I want to go a little nuts, a little gonzo. So I'm actually thinking about pulling a lot of Levi's stuff off of the shelf for 5e, because that's where I've got one group. They're comfortable playing 5e right now. They will play other things, but for long campaigns, they want to play 5e. And for those detractors out there, we have been playing for 2.5 years now. One game of 5e, so it's more than 6 sessions for sure. But yeah, no. From the absolute gonzo though, probably comes my number one recommendation for 5e is the total conversion. I love this product so much that I'm actually the first name on the backer page. And Ruins of Symbaroum. I know there are people out there that say play Symbaroum in its original setting, but quite honestly, the 5e conversion of this, they convert the travel rules, they convert the corruption rules. This is a fantastic product. It's very small scale. It takes place in a single kingdom, and then north of that is this huge forest called Davokar. And in Davokar are elves. The elves aren't necessarily evil, but they certainly don't want humans in their lands. And you, as an adventurer, want to go into the ruins, you want to go into the forest, and due to the Iron Pact, elves can kill you on sight. And so the political intrigue of all of that, and the kingdoms of Umbria and the surrounding areas of Dark Davokar is just it's this reminds me so much of like old school classic D&D that I cannot recommend this enough.
Gotcha. Well, guys, that is going to do it for our episode tonight. I think we've laid out a good case for why 5e is a good product, and some of the problems that have arisen kind of around the core of 5e. But as is tradition on Rollin' Bones, I know you have your actual play, but anything, that and anything else you want to push people towards.
So again on Mondays, so go find the channel James Corp. We're playing Savage Pathfinder. It is my first Savage Worlds game, and I'm absolutely loving it, absolutely enjoying it. So you could watch me stumble through that. And then, of course, every Friday, every Sunday, you can catch me in the chat for Legion of Myths Friday Night Chill Stream, and then, of course, RPG Digest. The community over at Legion of Myths, we're contentious at times, but what friends aren't? And that's truly the way that it is. If one friend can't tell another friend that they're being dumb, then why are we friends?
Exactly. And guys, next Tuesday, I will be joined by two returning guests, making his first and honestly overdue return to Rollin' Bones will be Casey Christopherson of Frog God fame. I haven't talked to Casey in forever. I'm really looking forward to having him back on the show, and with him will be the other contributor to the Creature Double feature that they just did. That is, of course, Rollin' Bones' favorite, John Hambone McGuire from the Vintage RPG podcast. So they'll be on to talk about their Creature Double feature. Because it's October and because those guys love their horror movies, we'll probably talk about, monsters in 5e and all that kind of cool stuff. So until then, I'm glad you guys turned out for a Tuesday show. This is a lot of fun. So I feel confident to keep plugging away on Tuesdays. So until next week, whether you rolled a 1 or a 20, I'm so glad that you rolled your bones with me, Ryan Howard, and I will see you guys next time.